"Sir, I need you to move to seat 35B, the flight attendant said, her voice sharp and demanding. "We have a family that needs to sit together, and your seat is the only one available." The elderly man looked up from his aisle seat, the one he'd paid extra for 3 months ago because of a war injury from decades past. "Ma'am, I booked this seat for medical reasons," he said quietly, his weathered hands gripping the armrest. But Sarah, the flight attendant, didn't budge. "If you don't move, we can't close the doors and depart on schedule." So Frank Miller stood up, limped down the narrow aisle of the Boeing 737, and squeezed himself into a cramped middle seat between two strangers. His left knee, shattered by shrapnel in Vietnam, throbbed with every step. 9 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Captain James Rodriguez stepped out, his pilot's uniform crisp and commanding. What he did next would change the meaning of that Delta flight forever. Welcome to Everyday Hero Files, where real stories of courage and compassion remind us what America truly stands for. It was barely dawn at Chicago O'Hare Airport when Frank Miller settled into Gate B-12. At 78 years old, the retired Marine looked exactly like what he was, a quiet man in a navy cardigan, khaki slacks, and well-worn New Balance sneakers. But if you watched him carefully, you'd notice the subtle limp in his left leg, the kind of injury that doesn't come from age but from war. Frank had booked this American Airlines flight 3 months earlier. He was traveling from his small ranch in Montana to Norfolk, Virginia, to watch his granddaughter Sarah graduate from Old Dominion University, first in their family to earn a college degree since him. He wasn't going to miss it. That's why he'd paid extra from his modest veteran's pension for seat 12C, an aisle seat in premium economy. Just enough legroom to ease the pressure on his damaged knee. Not a luxury for Frank, but a necessity. He boarded early with Group 2, offering a polite "thank you" to the gate agent and gripping the handrail as he made his way down the jet bridge. When he reached his seat, he lowered himself carefully, stowed his small duffel under the seat ahead, and exhaled deeply. For a moment, the constant ache in his leg subsided. That peace lasted exactly 12 minutes. 3 rows ahead, a woman was frantically waving down a flight attendant. Sarah Martinez, according to her name tag, leaned in to listen, then tapped her tablet with growing concern. She turned and walked straight toward Frank, her practiced smile already in place. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her tone polite but firm. "Are you seated in 12C?" Frank nodded once. "Yes, miss." Sarah crouched slightly to his level, maintaining her customer service smile. "We have a situation. There's a family, a mother with twin 4-year-olds, who got separated during online check-in. They're currently scattered across 3 different rows. Your seat, along with the 2 beside it, is the only block where they can sit together." Frank's weathered brow creased slightly. "This is my assigned seat, miss. I booked it months ago because of a service-connected knee injury." Sarah's smile flickered but held. "I understand, sir. We really appreciate your cooperation. It's just for this one flight." Frank leaned back, studying her face. He wasn't trying to be difficult, but he'd chosen this exact seat, paid extra for it, because anything else meant 5 hours of agony. He glanced toward the front of the plane. A young mother clutching a McDonald's Happy Meal was trying to calm twin boys who looked tired and cranky. Then he looked down at his own hands, scarred from farm work, steady despite his age. "What's the alternative?" he asked quietly. Sarah consulted her tablet again. "We can offer you seat 35B. It's toward the back, center section." Frank blinked. "Middle seat." "Yes, sir. It's the only unoccupied seat remaining." He didn't respond immediately, just let the information settle. Seat 35B meant no legroom, no ability to stretch, sandwiched between strangers near the lavatories where turbulence hit hardest. He knew aircraft layouts from his years of military transport flights. "I'm sorry, miss," Frank said calmly but firmly, "but I really can't manage back there. My leg won't make it through the flight." Sarah's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I do understand, sir, but we really need to accommodate this family. If you choose not to move, we may not be able to depart on time." There it was, the unspoken threat. Frank glanced around. Other passengers were starting to watch. The nearby conversations had gone quiet. He could feel the weight of silent judgment settling over him, a stubborn old man refusing to help a mother with children. His jaw tightened. He looked up at Sarah one more time. "This isn't right," he said quietly. "I'll note your concerns, sir," she replied. "But I need a decision now." A long breath passed. Then, slowly, Frank unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, gripping the headrest for balance. What Frank said next would echo through that cabin long after they landed. With a voice low but controlled, Frank looked directly at Sarah and said, "My name is Frank Miller, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. I'd like it noted in your report that I gave up a medically necessary seat under pressure." Sarah only nodded, already motioning the family forward as Frank gathered his canvas duffel and turned toward the back of the plane. The little boy looked up at him as they passed and smiled. Frank gave him a gentle nod. No resentment, no drama, just quiet resignation. Seat 35B was exactly as he'd imagined. Cramped, tight, wedged between a college student wearing Apple AirPods and a businessman already claiming both armrests. The overhead reading light was broken. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. Frank lowered himself slowly, wincing as his knee bent at an unnatural angle. He said nothing, just rested his weathered hands on his lap and closed his eyes. No one noticed him. No one offered to help. No one said a word. But someone was watching. 3 rows ahead, across the aisle, sat Rebecca Thompson, a 45-year-old public relations executive from Denver. She'd boarded just before Frank, laptop bag in the overhead, blazer folded neatly beside her. She'd heard everything, seen everything, and now she watched him hunched in that cramped seat, the lines of pain deeper than before. Rebecca reached for her iPhone, not to post on social media or complain online, but to text a contact. Her friend Maria worked in customer relations at American Airlines headquarters in Dallas. Her message was brief but urgent. Passenger Frank Miller forced from aisle seat 12C despite confirmed booking and medical need. Now in 35B middle seat. Flight AA, 1847. Crew dismissive of veteran. Please escalate immediately. She hit send, then set the phone down and stared out the small window. She didn't know what would come of it, but some moments demand action. Some moments you don't stay silent, even when everyone else does. Meanwhile, Frank sat motionless in seat 35B, hands folded over his stomach, shoulders drawn inward. The middle seat always made you feel smaller, but this felt like disappearing entirely. His knee throbbed in waves. Every few minutes he shifted slightly, just enough to prevent the joint from locking completely, but there was nowhere to go. His left leg pressed awkwardly against the seat back ahead of him. No room to extend, no aisle to lean into. The college kid kept his AirPods in, lost in some Netflix show. The businessman tapped away on his Dell laptop, his elbow occupying Frank's space like he owned it. But up in the cockpit, something was about to change everything. In the cockpit, Captain James Rodriguez adjusted his headset and ran through pre-flight checks with his co-pilot. A former Air Force officer with 15,000 flight hours and 25 years of service, Rodriguez was a man of precision and discipline forged in military steel. Then his console lit up, a red notification flagged by corporate headquarters. He tapped the screen. Passenger concern, Frank Miller, Flight AA, 1847. Issue, veteran forced from medically necessary seat. Below it, a name he recognized, Rebecca Thompson, Diamond Elite member and PR board advisor. The name Miller hit him like lightning. Rodriguez turned to his co-pilot. "Hold taxi clearance," he said, already unbuckling his harness. "Captain," the co-pilot looked confused. "Hold position. I'll be back in 5 minutes." Rodriguez stepped into the narrow galley behind the cockpit and found the lead flight attendant, a senior crew member named Patricia. "Who moved the passenger from 12C?" he asked. Patricia hesitated, pointing toward the back. "Sarah relocated him to accommodate a family. He's in 35B now, middle seat." Rodriguez nodded once. No anger, no judgment, just quiet resolve. He straightened his uniform, smoothed the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, and began walking down the aisle. Rebecca spotted him first. The entire cabin seemed to sense the shift as the cockpit door opened and stayed open. Passengers lowered their phones. Conversation stopped. Captain Rodriguez's presence didn't demand attention, it commanded it. Measured steps, eyes scanning, calm and focused until he stopped at row 35. Frank looked up, startled by the sudden shadow. He found himself staring at the captain, tall, immaculate uniform, flight wings gleaming silver on his chest. And then, without hesitation, Captain James Rodriguez raised his right hand and rendered a crisp, formal military salute. The air in the cabin changed instantly. Rebecca felt it first. The silence was absolute. Frank's eyes searched the captain's face, confused and uncertain. "Staff Sergeant Frank Miller," the captain said, his voice clear and unwavering, carrying to every corner of the cabin. "On behalf of American Airlines and as a fellow serviceman, I offer you my deepest apologies." Frank blinked, speechless. "You should never have been asked to move from your seat," Rodriguez continued. "It was an error, and we're going to make it right." Passengers whispered. Someone slowly lowered their tray table, watching in amazement. Rodriguez turned toward the aisle. "Is Sarah Martinez in the cabin?" What the captain ordered next would leave the entire flight crew, and every passenger, speechless. The young flight attendant stepped forward from the galley, her face pale. "Yes, sir." "You will personally escort Staff Sergeant Miller to seat 2A, Rodriguez commanded. Sarah hesitated. "Captain, first class is." "If 2A is occupied," Rodriguez interrupted, "you will ask for a volunteer. If no one volunteers, you will explain that the captain of this aircraft is personally requesting that seat on behalf of a decorated combat veteran." Frank started to rise, but Rodriguez raised his hand. "Please, sir, let us correct this mistake. We owe you that much." Frank sat back down, stunned. Rebecca watched the flicker of disbelief cross his weathered face, followed by something else, recognition, gratitude. Frank stood slowly, carefully. His knee buckled slightly, but Rodriguez steadied him with a firm hand under his elbow. The businessman beside him suddenly moved aside, awkward and ashamed. The college student pulled out his AirPods, embarrassment flickering in his eyes. As they moved toward the front of the plane, Rodriguez looked back and nodded once to Rebecca Thompson. Their eyes met across the aisle. No words passed between them. None were needed. Rebecca settled back in her seat, breath caught in her chest. She wasn't sure what part of her had needed to witness this moment, but something deep inside had just been restored. The kind of restoration that only happens when justice, long delayed, finally stands up. As Frank walked down the aisle, something remarkable happened. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. People moved. The businessman who hadn't given him a second glance now shifted awkwardly, eyes downcast. The young man in the window seat stood up quickly, muttering, "Sir, sorry, sir," though Frank hadn't asked for anything. Captain Rodriguez didn't release Frank's elbow until he was steady. Then he looked toward Sarah, who stood frozen halfway down the aisle, her tablet clutched like a shield. "Miss Martinez," he said calmly, "seat 2A. Now." "Yes, Captain," she replied, her voice smaller than before. She led the way. Frank followed slowly, painfully, every step careful and measured. That knee hadn't been right in 50 years, probably never would be. But now he walked with dignity, and every row he passed felt it. Passengers turned. Some murmured quietly. Others simply watched in respectful silence. And one man, middle-aged, wearing a Chicago Cubs cap, reached up and touched his chest with an open palm. A silent salute. Rebecca sat motionless, hands folded, breath held. She didn't reach for her phone this time. She just watched, eyes bright with unshed tears. When they reached first class, what happened next brought the entire cabin to tears. When they reached row 2, Sarah stopped. She turned toward the passenger already seated in 2A, a man in an expensive polo shirt, sipping bottled water, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind him. "I'm sorry, sir," Sarah said hesitantly. "We need to reassign your seat." The man looked up, confused. "Wait, what? Captain's orders?" He turned and saw Frank, saw the faded duffel bag with military patches, the age in his face, the quiet exhaustion. The businessman nodded without argument. "Sir," he said to Frank quietly, "it's an honor." Frank didn't know what to say. He just nodded, grateful. Captain Rodriguez turned to Sarah again, his voice carrying to the first 6 rows. If that seat hadn't been available, I would have reassigned my co-pilot's jump seat. And if that wasn't available, he paused, I would have given up mine. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The statement wasn't for her. It was for everyone listening. And they were all listening now. Frank lowered himself into the spacious leather seat of 2A. It wasn't just the legroom. It was the dignity of it, the quiet respect. A crew member brought him a blanket, fresh coffee, a sincere apology. But what broke him wasn't the first-class treatment. It was the voice from halfway down the aisle. A young man stood up, late 30s, clean-shaven, wearing jeans and a University of Colorado hoodie. His voice shook when he spoke. Staff Sergeant Miller? Frank turned his head. I served under you, the man said. Camp Pendleton, 2010. You probably don't remember me. Frank stared, then slowly his expression softened. Corporal Jackson, the young man continued, his voice cracking. You pulled me and 3 others from that burning Humvee in Afghanistan. We never got to thank you properly. His voice broke completely. He tried to say more, failed, and simply nodded, tears streaming down his face as he sat back down. Frank looked away, jaw set tight, but the silence around him had transformed. This wasn't the uncomfortable silence of earlier. This was reverence. Captain Rodriguez stepped to the intercom, adjusted the microphone, and spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice rang through the cabin, steady and deliberate. Before we depart, I need to make an announcement. Every head turned. Today, a mistake was made. A man who served this country, who carries both visible and invisible scars from that service, was asked to give up his seat. Not because of an airline error, but because we forgot what honor looks like. What the captain said next would be recorded, shared, and remembered by millions. Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Let me be clear. We will not take off while injustice sits quietly in our cabin. A hush swept through the plane. Staff Sergeant Frank Miller is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. He fought in Vietnam and Afghanistan. He has worn the uniform longer than most of us have drawn breath. He didn't ask for special treatment. He simply asked to keep the seat he booked so his service-connected injury wouldn't cause him pain. Another pause. We failed him. The captain's voice softened but never wavered. But Marines don't leave their own behind. Not in combat. Not at 35,000 feet. He looked down the aisle, toward Rebecca, toward the veteran still quietly crying, toward passengers who had once looked away but now sat straighter. And if that means this flight runs 10 minutes late, he said, then I'll take every one of those minutes with pride. He clicked off the microphone. The cabin, already breathless, erupted in applause. Not forced, not polite, genuine. It began with one pair of hands, then another, until row by row it rolled like thunder. Frank didn't raise his hand or bow his head. He just sat there, still and quiet, finally seen. Rebecca wiped tears from her eyes, and for the first time in years, she remembered something she'd almost forgotten. Honor doesn't fade. It just waits for the right moment to rise again. The plane landed in Norfolk just after noon. When Frank deplaned, his granddaughter Sarah was waiting at baggage claim in her ODU graduation gown, holding a handmade sign. Welcome, Grandpa Frank. When she saw him limping toward her, she dropped the sign and ran. He didn't brace for impact. He let her hug him with full force. Your knee, she said, pulling back with concern. I've had worse, he smiled, and for the first time in years, the smile reached his eyes. 2 weeks later, Frank received a letter from American Airlines, a lifetime flight privilege, no fees, no restrictions, just respect. A month after that, another letter arrived, from the Department of Veterans Affairs. After a public inquiry triggered by the flight incident, they'd reopened his file and discovered a Bronze Star recommendation that had been lost in paperwork for 50 years. It was finally being processed. Frank folded both letters, placed them beside the flag in his study, and said nothing. Because sometimes the greatest honor isn't in the medal, it's in finally being seen. Subscribe to Everyday Hero Files, where no act of quiet heroism is ever forgotten.